It's now 1:02. We'll give it a few seconds, let the public log in.
Let's see, looks like we have 4 attendees. 5 attendees.
Okay. All right, it's now 1:02. I'd like to call the Castle County Planning Board meeting to order for Tuesday, April 26, 2022. Everyone had a chance to review the agenda. Yes, sir. No discussion. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion.
Mr. Harris, second by Mr. Johnston to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please let us know by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Public comments. Mr. Hoagland, looks like we have a sign-in sheet for Carl and Susan Hubbard for public comments. Yes, sir.
Thank you, guys. I've never been in a forum like this or anything. I know that this is set aside for us to be able to speak, and it's about a high impact environment. My issue is I have a sawmill within 200 feet of my dwelling. And he told me it was going to be a temporary sawmill site. It wound up being a 5-day operation, and they come out on Sundays and Saturdays and Sundays and load the trucks and all this stuff. So it wound up being a 7-day-a-week operation. His truck's 50,000 pounds coming by my well within 20 feet from that wall from my well. It's impacted my family greatly. I have a 4-family dwelling in that circle. And who I'm talking to, the address I'm talking about here is Keck Sawmill. It's 7190 North Carolina Highway. My address is 223 Alamance Drive. He owns 30+ acres and I own 17 acres. His land butts up against the back corner of my land, but his back corner of his land butts up against right at my dwelling. I understand that they're trying to let him grandfather in. I have no problem with people being able to grandfather in when they're in a halfway decent compliance to begin with. But when you're within a dwelling that close to a dwelling, it affects my life. It affects my 7 grandchildren that live around me. I'm not against, certain sawmills being grandfathered in, certain businesses being grandfathered in. But at this point, with this sawmill, I think that, yes, they should be given time to take and come into compliance with the new compliances. But being grandfathered in, I don't feel we should give this person that. They've been in the process of putting this sawmill in for 2.5 years already. It was set up to be a temporary sawmill, and that is an agricultural lot. Now it is a complete commercial sawmill. They have 3 full-time employees other than themselves. And like I said, it's within 200 feet of my home. When I'm watching TV, I have to turn the volume up to drown the sawmill. The sawmill itself, he told me, oh, you're not going to be bothered by it. The sawmill itself, we can't hear the new blade type sawmill as much as we can, the planer, the facer, chipper, all that stuff is in my dwelling. I mean, it's right there. And I prayed about everything before I come here today. I've never been to a forum like this, didn't have no intentions, but I've tried to work with this guy, and there's been several issues already. And I don't feel it's a quality of life for me as a Castle County patron. I should have to put up with that. Am I against any businesses making noise? No, sir. I know that we have to have businesses to survive and to make our community grow. But you don't grow your community in your back door, with a commercial dwelling. That's why commercial lots are set up and private and residential lots are set up. So That's really all I have to say. I would like you to take that into consideration before you make a decision to grandfather these in and to extend these things out. The new regulations, I mean, it says it plainly that what they're for is, basically for us to benefit in a, let's see here. The following regulation is a high impact development adopted for the purpose of promoting health, safety, and general awareness. All right, and that's my only concern. I just want to have a well-being. I bought that property there and moved to the end of a road. And I figured all my life, my family and I lived that in with no problems. And all of a sudden, he comes to the corner of his property. Now the planner knows there's bunches of property that he could have put it on, even up next to his house. But he chose not to put it at his son's house or his house. He moved it to the very corner at my house. I just feel that the new regulations is for my benefit. And I just ask you guys to consider it.
Thank you, Mr. Hope.
Thank you.
Any other public comments, Cindy?
No, sir.
Okay. Next, we'll go to the approval.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I'll make one additional comment. I did receive an email just about an hour before the meeting. During COVID, we were accepting emails, we were accepting public comments via email, but there was a deadline for that. It's kind of a gray area now. We're not really accepting public comments via email anymore since we have an in-person meeting. But I did forward that email to the board as Ms. Catherine Hubbard is her name. As she requested, I forwarded that email to the board members.
Okay.
So not exactly a public comment, but very similar to the gentleman's remarks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hope.
Yes, sir.
All right, next, item 4 on the agenda, the approval of the March 2022 meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? There's no discussion. I'll make a motion to approve. Approve the second, Mr. Harris, to approve the March 2022 meeting minutes. All those in favor, please let me know, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Next, we have unfinished business, the Watershed Review Board pending appeals. Mr. Hoagland, have we heard anything from the planning board attorney since the last meeting?
Nothing in particular other than just more or less a check-in, and the same goes for all the other attorneys involved representing the appellants. There's really no movement on the pending litigation in Superior Court, and there's no desire to move forward with the hearing for the Watershed Review Board. So what's expected today is just another continuance resolution, almost exactly the same as you passed for the March meeting.
Okay, thank you. So I see the motion here in our agenda packet to continue the meeting. So I'll go ahead and make the motion. I move to adopt the resolution of the March 22nd, 2022 planning board meeting as written with the following amendment. Now therefore be resolved by the Caswell County Watershed Review Board as follows. The Watershed Review Board hearing with respect to the Sunrock appeals now scheduled to begin on April 26, 2022 shall be and hereby is continued until the next Watershed Review Board meeting scheduled for 1 p.m. on Tuesday, May 24, 2022. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor, please let me know by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Motion carries. All right, Mr. Hoagland, next on our agenda is the comprehensive plan discussion and review. And I see we have Mr. Singleton and other representatives of the Forest Service here today. So with this, I'll let you start, and then we'll certainly want to hear from them the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, just to kind of begin here. So If you'll recall, during our discussion at the previous planning board meeting, the board requested that I review and present current NCDOT priority data for Caswell County to submit basically to kind of conduct a report of the current success of the goals and objectives outlined in the comprehensive plan, and to bring forward more accurate or more up-to-date 2020 census data. And so I prepared a slide to do that. I'll be honest with you, it may take some time. It's about 30 slides, and I'll try to get through it quickly. But I do expect that this will be a pretty lengthy discussion, similar to what we had last time. But Mr. Chairman, following up to the invite list that we talked about at the onset of this discussion, Brian Singleton from the North Carolina Forestry Service is here today. And so just to, it's really up to the board for format. If you wanted to hear from Mr. Singleton first, if he has any, if you have any particular questions for him about forestry throughout the county, I'm certainly happy to do that. Or if you want to go through the presentation first, then we can certainly do that.
Well, sure, if there's no objection from the board, Mr. Singleton being here, I'd love to hear from him. If there's no objection. Chair recognizes Mr. Singleton. Thank y'all for being here today. I know you are fighting wildfires last month.
That's right,
Yeah.
I tell you. But we're here for whatever kind of questions and answers. I know I talked to Matthew about some different things, and really I didn't know if what you wanted to hear from us. About, do you want statistical data, just kind of an overview of what's going on in the county as it pertains to, I'm assuming, timber harvesting, things of that nature?
Yeah, Mr. Singleton, I think in the comprehensive plan, it was proposed to have to regulate forestry. And then, of course, we broached that subject at the last meeting that the state statute really doesn't allow the county to regulate logging regulations. But
That's right, and I've got a copy of the 2005 right to practice forestry bill by the state of North Carolina. So basically, it basically verbatim, the county shall not adopt or enforce any ordinance, rule, or regulation or resolution that regulates forestry practices, specifically to those ones or tracts of land that's in present use valuation, and or if it has a forest management plan on it, they're actively managing it based off that forest management plan. So, it's a bill already there in place. And from the forestry perspective and harvesting timber, I don't know if there were concerns about what that is, but there's a lot of clear cutting goes on in this county. Roughly 6,000, give or take, acres, depends on the year, is cut. I've seen it high as 8,000 acres that's been cut in this county per year. And necessarily that's not a bad thing. So you look at clear cut, what is a clear cut? That is actually a forest management term, meaning this once it's cut, it's either coming back naturally or being planted back. We're not talking about land clearing. That's a totally different animal. That's urbanization type stuff, development stuff. So from the standpoint of this county, if you look at 6,000, give or take, acres cut a year, that's a rough number that fluctuates, right? But about 2,000 acres of that is being planted back. The remainder of that is all coming back natural, meaning native vegetation is growing back on it. Not all of it, a small percentage may be cleaned up for agricultural purposes, whether that's pasture land, crop land, that type of deal. But the majority of that timber land is either being planted back or coming back naturally. And like I said, that's not a bad thing. That's all managed to benefit, the landowner as income, to benefit tree growth. And part of our job as a Forest Service is, we work with these private landowners and we write a lot of management plans and give them recommendations on when to cut, how to cut, and what to cut in their given property based on their objectives and sound forest management. So when we manage a forest, we're managing it for the health of that forest, as well as a natural resource that we can take advantage of, us as consumers and folks who use it every day, right? So we want to see it managed in the right way. And that means cut when it needs to be cut, thin it when it needs to be thinned. And that all comes down to species specific, site specific. It's I get a lot of questions about, well, what are we planting back? Well, majority of that's pine, but it depends on the site as well. So a lot of folks ask, well, what about hardwood timber? Well, it depends on the site. Ridge tops is pine, right? So bottom land, mid slope stuff is hardwood timber. So it's just depends, but clear cutting is not a bad tool. It's just like a tomato on the vine. When it gets red and ripe, you better pick it now. If not, it's gonna rot, right? And we're looking at it from a management and keeping our trees healthy, keeping disease and insects at a minimum. And in turn, it helps wildlife habitat. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'm kind of thinking y'all were wanting to gear towards the logging part of it.
Well, I think you gave a good synopsis, Mr. Singleton. Any questions?
Yeah, I'll just mention a couple of things. I think in particular, as the chairman mentioned, as you get further on in the comprehensive plan, they have a list of potential ordinances, and this was back in 2013 and 2014. And among them are some sort of ordinance around logging regulations. Now, obviously, state statutes kind of override anything that we can do on the local level. But it's been an education for me over the past few years to talk to you about forestry management plans, and I'll get calls, from concerned neighbors who all of a sudden they wake up and there's forestry activity next door, and almost basically with 100% certainty that property has a forestry management plan. You're aware of it. Your team's already been out there, and there's really a prescribed method that's taking place, even if it may seem alarming to somebody who has lived next door for sometimes 10 years. And I wanted to mention to the board too, that you touched on this a little bit. The county actually prohibits clear cutting of lots prior to subdivision. So if somebody has a draft subdivision proposal, they can bring it into the office and have it reviewed. Then they would go out and take out the vegetation. They're technically not supposed to go out, take out all the vegetation, and then come forward with a subdivision proposal. So I think that's just kind of the context of what the comprehensive plan says about logging regulations. But I would assume that the folks who were involved in constructing the comprehensive plan back in 2013-14 may not have known about state statutes that regulate that type of activity and may not know about forestry management plans.
That's right. And it's probably, I guarantee it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of the tracks that I know that's harvested if we've read the management plans on already and gave recommendations on what to cut and that type of thing. If this has reached maturity, you'd be better off to get it into better production, which will in turn keep the forest healthy, that type of deal. And it's a lot more regulations that go into forestry. It's, several laws protect our water quality. And that's another thing that we do is we have to check these logging operations. They have to buffer streams. They can't change temperatures of water. They can't allow sediment to enter a stream, right? So all that is regulated already on the water quality aspect of it. But this already got a lot of regulations pertaining to that. And you look at a clear cut, clear cuts are aesthetically can be, ugly. Obviously, it looks like a bomb went off, right? But what's a clear cut look like a year later? You think about that. It's a great up thicket, right? So it's from a water quality standpoint on the cutover itself, it's filtering all that water. It's not as much erosion runoff as it would be if you clear cut it all and say you dissed it all up. That would be more runoff or put in housing developments or asphalt, right? It's going to be more runoff than there. So, a year later, it's right up thicket. Deer, turkey, songbirds, salamanders, all that good stuff. Love it, and it's not a bad thing. It's actually green and producing us more oxygen because of these other trees growing there. It's that carbon footprint.
Mr. Singleton, as you've seen, transfer of farms over the years out of cultivation, it'd be safe to say most of those farms are converted to tree farms.
Absolutely. It's more and more that's converted to tree farms. It used to be, I've got aerial photographs out by the office. I'll show them to you from the 40s. If you look at it, everything's open. Everything. You look at them today, it's way more timberland now than ever has been. And all those agricultural crops that's coming out of agriculture, is majority of them being planted back or in this few years.
So basically, I think what I'm hearing is in this comprehensive plan, we really shouldn't have reference to forestry type of plan, right?
Yeah, I would not necessarily. Existing is probably most appropriate, and I would hesitate to move forward with anything until I become much more familiar with what state statutes say about forestry. I know, for example, you can be categorized as a bona fide farm if your property's in farmland, and that makes you exempt from zoning. If the county were to have zoning, then that would be an exemption. But basically, I think that what's in place now is appropriate. I would say.
Where in the comprehensive plan do we find forestry?
So there's a few mentions of it throughout, but specifically section 4.5, general land use strategies. They talk about potential ordinances, and the fourth one there is for logging regulations. If I remember correctly, it's just a list of ordinances. I don't know that they provide much more than that.
Potential ordinances on page 120.
Yeah, page 120. As discussed by residents in community meetings, there is a growing concern about timber harvesting, and a possible approach to this issue is developing a logging ordinance. And it says, see Appendix A, resources for trees and local regulations in North Carolina.
We can pass along ordinances, correct?
I'm not sure.
Well, according to state statute, I don't think.
May be an opportunity to pass.
I mean, really, I got several of these books, are Forestry Best Man.
I'm not proposing anything, I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding what I'm hearing you say. It sounds like even if we wanted to, the state would actually propose thing anyway.
Who proposed what?
That change, or that to be looked into.
You know, specifically, I don't know, but the overall steering committee was probably a couple dozen people, and I think included planning board.
Those laws have been in place for years, as far as I know.
My assumption would be that you may be able to have some sort of regulations around tree preservation or clear cutting or something like that in context of zoning and subdivision regulations. You know what I mean? So you may hypothetically have something that says, if you create X number of lots, you must preserve X percentage of vegetation, kind of thing, as opposed to.
You were getting into a zoning thing, you can put
Right.
lots of things in there.
Right, and you actually see this a lot in larger towns and cities where they have landscaping requirements for the new convenience store that goes in, or the pharmacy or whatever. Maybe something along those lines as opposed to strictly logging.
None of that would apply.
Yeah, that, maybe we could incorporate that to the subdivision ordinance, but I'm thinking since the state statute clearly says we can't have a logging ordinance thing. So there's not any confusion, maybe that just needs to be removed from that.
That's what I was trying to get to.
And we'll touch on that again in the presentation.
Let me ask you this, Steve. I've heard some people want to plant pine trees, but one of the things that's keeping them from doing that is they've got to trim those trees. Is that true?
Trim them, that's,
Okay.
no, it depends on species of trees you're planting, but right now, like loblolly pine is typically being planted back for timber production purposes. And those trees are self-pruned, once they shade out, it'll self-prune.
Yeah, I'm about to say that will work you to death.
Oh, yeah, no tree anymore. It's kind of a, plant it and watch them grow type scenario.
That's great. Okay. And if somebody have questions, they just call you.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Is there any way we can't put that in the comprehensive plan, where to get in contact, I guess, with our map. It doesn't say explicitly we talked about before, does it?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you get back into the back end of the comprehensive plan with the appendix and everything, there's some contact information. I think it's mostly for state level agencies.
Yeah.
But I don't see any reason why the board couldn't propose kind of a resources page of local agencies to contact as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would ask that we could do that, Chairman Johnson, make it easy.
Sure, we could listing them as a contact.
Right.
Sure.
Absolutely. Put my cell phone in there. That's the best way to get it. I mean, really.
That's your office cell phone.
Yeah. Call me.
Mr. Singleton, is that Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Hey,
Yeah.
I hadn't seen you in a while. Thanks to be. Any other questions, Mr. Singleton or Mr. Thompson? Really appreciate y'all taking time to come here. I know y'all are very busy. Appreciate the resources y'all provide for the county. So thanks for all y'all do.
You need to hang out, or
It's up to the board.
we're fine with hanging out for a while. We got questions or even more.
If you need something to help bring on a nap, then that might be,
I was telling you,
it might be time.
we're game to hang out.
I mean, I know a 30 slide presentation on the comprehensive plan is really exciting stuff. So if you're prepared for it, we can do that.
It's up to y'all, Brian. We appreciate y'all.
Let me ask you one more question.
Yeah.
That book there, can we get that in a PDF to maybe put on into the comprehensive plan so somebody could refer to that
I think there is a PDF.
There is a PDF.
in the comprehensive plan?
I think, well, we could get a PDF soon.
Okay,
That's not a problem. Yeah, that's not.
that would be great.
Thank you, Brian. All right, Chair recognizes Mr. Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, I have prepared a slide here that is really just kind of an update on all of the goals and aspirations that were set forward in the comprehensive plan initially. Then I get into some data that is an update on current census information. And then I get into a little bit towards the end of some of the current and pending projects for NCDOT. So I really just went through the comprehensive plan here, beginning with section, I believe it's 4.1, where it starts to outline the goals and strategies. That is on page 95 in the document. And what I've got here really just kind of follows along in a bullet pointed format as opposed to all of the additional text in the comprehensive plan. Excuse me. I'm getting over a sinus infection, by the way, so please excuse me if I cough here during the presentation. So there were three top issues that were identified during the original construction of the comprehensive plan, and that was economic development, health and wellness, and then agricultural and rural preservation. And in most circumstances, agriculture was spelled with an L. We'll pretend we didn't see that. And so what they did in the comprehensive plan was they broke areas down by goals, and then the hollow bullet points are kind of some other programming to support the various goals as you work through the document. So I'm just going to go through these one by one and give you my best understanding of the progress that's been made. And I will go ahead and say that this is probably an incomplete list because this is a truly comprehensive document in terms of areas that are probably best handled by economic development or the Chamber of Commerce or even the Parks and Rec Director or even the public schools. And so I did my best to answer that as best as I could with reaching out to some of those agencies. But I think inevitably they would provide more information than I might have for you today. So goal one would be to generate employment opportunities for Castle County residents. First, by attracting non-traditional alternative agricultural related industries to the county, constructing a multipurpose ag center that serves as a one-stop shop for farmers, develop training programs through PCC that focus on agriculture, and continue to market and explore industrial economic development opportunities within the county. So specifically to that, these are just a few examples. The progress that's been made on this, and I'm sure our economic development director could tell you about others, but Measure.io being recruited as the anchor tenant for Co-Square, the co-working space downtown. Obviously, PCC's seed project that is slated for Pelham. In addition to that, PCC's ag business technology. And the Riverside Furniture Corporation is probably a good example of more of a traditional industrial or manufacturing type facility coming online down in the Matkins community. Goal number two under economic development, provide adequate infrastructure to support the planned employment growth that the county desires. Develop broadband infrastructure. Obviously, we've talked a great deal about this. Hire a full-time economic development director. Coordinate county and municipal policies and capital expenditures to focus development within areas already served by urban services. The first two here, I would say we can check off as marks of progress. We've talked about this fairly recently. Charter Spectrum has been in receipt or is in receipt of $3.1 million in federal grant money for broadband deployment. And in I believe it's 2018, the county officially made Corey Lindsay the full-time economic development director for the county alone. For the couple of years prior to that, it was kind of a shared position between PCC and the county. The third one there, I kind of striked through that because I'm not really sure of the progress on there, and I don't really know that there has been any progress there to coordinate county and municipal policies and services to focus on economic development. This would be the type of area where you may be extending water lines, along out County Home Road, for example, for additional development or some of the other near urban corridors in and around the town of Yanceyville, that may be unincorporated county properties.
Actually, last year, excuse me, when we got the first batch of COVID money, the mayor of Yanceyville came to the board and asked for some additional money for their broadband development. And that was put in their budget by the county. So there's a little bit of this.
Yeah, that's good to know. Section 4.2 is for health and wellness. And the first goal there is to promote healthy food choices and expand access to fresh, healthy local foods. They aim to do this by developing a plan for food access and community-based food systems, and to promote fresh, healthy local produce and goods in farmers markets and local stores. The progress here is that the Health Collaborative actually created something called the Community Food Network in 2020, even though I'm not sure that they've met or put forward any additional policy initiatives since then. If you go to their website, it seems that the work kind of came about in 2020 and basically ended there. But the Caswell County Farmers Market in recent years has started up again along Highway 86. And they meet each Thursday at 4 o'clock between the months of April and September. So I think they're getting ready to do the third market for the year, second or third market for the year.
Let me ask you this.
Yes,
Do
sir.
you want to include the fact that Seed on 29 is going to have a, what is the company that's going to come through? I forgot the name of the company coming through, but they're going to be buying and selling through, kind of like how they do on Thursdays. 14,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's great to include. And if I remember correctly, there's a future slide that touches on that and lists all the amenities that will be on the Seed property. But to your point, I think that as you guys review this and possibly make recommendations, it might be best to reorder some of these priorities. You know, some of them kind of blend with each other in a way that you wouldn't think they would have in the past. You know, when they talked about this in 2013 and 14, I think that they were thinking ag center over here, healthy food initiatives over here, but with Seed, you really kind of have a blend. Right. So goal number 2 for health and wellness, promote active living by building upon existing recreational programs and developing additional walking trails, bike routes, and outdoor facilities. I actually reached out to the Parks and Rec director on this in preparation for this, and I think he's done some great work with it. He'll tell you too that there's some initiatives he's working on that he would like to see completed, but their goal in doing this was update the Parks and Rec master plan, encourage shared use agreements for schools and church playgrounds, recreational facilities, et cetera, increase opportunities for physical activity in the school environment, and promote safe transportation to and from school where feasible, and promote bicycle routes by distributing maps and other marketing materials in visitor centers and bike shops. So again, I spoke with the Parks and Rec director on this yesterday. Apparently there was a master plan for Parks and Rec developed in 2017, but the proposal was not approved, or at some point it kind of got bogged down in the process. I'm not 100% sure what happened. The director is actively working on a shared use agreement, and the schools have actually helped with promoting activities at our local Parks and Rec. He told me that there was a pretty big dip during COVID, but now just this spring, they had 300 youth participants in spring of 2022 alone. And this was more active on the younger ages. And then as you got up towards the high school ages, you know, they maybe only had 2 or 3 teams for the different leagues, but a big uptick in participation. There were 300 youth participants. In terms of increased physical activity in the schools and transportation programs, I'm just simply unaware of what may have happened there. And with regards to bike routes and promotion, initially I thought nothing had really happened here, but then I remember the Cycle NC program has actually stopped in Yanceyville for the past, I think, 4 or 5 years. There may have been a year there where there was no stop because of COVID, I think 2020. But Cycle NC is a statewide event where I think it takes maybe a week or 2, but they'll start up in the mountains and they'll ride their bikes all the way through to the coast. And Yanceyville's actually done a really good job of making themselves a stop along that path. And they'll come in, sometimes they'll tour the historic building, or they'll come into downtown. They get snacks and drinks and water and Gatorade and move on to the next stop.
So over 300.
I believe so, yeah. And Cycle NC does a really good job too. Every stop that they make, they share that information on social media. So I don't actually recall seeing, they might have overlooked us in Yanceyville, but I recall them actively posting about the different stops that they made throughout the state. And hopefully in the future, they can pay a little bit more attention to us.
And Mr. Hartman,
Yes, sir.
wasn't didn't the mayor of Milton, wasn't she talking about some parks, plans or some
Greenway.
greenway, and I want to see some other bouncing around also, all of that they were working on too.
Yeah, so at points in the comprehensive plan, you will see a proposal for possible bike routes throughout the county. And actually, I emailed this to you guys earlier before today's meeting. In doing my research here with the NCDOT, I found out that there was a comprehensive transportation plan put together for the county in 2017 and 2018. And that one actually looks more closely at possible bike routes. So I think the mayor was talking about potential bike paths, but I think that's definitely something to explore if the board and the county wanted to go that direction. I have been to a couple of economic development conferences in my few years here as county planner, and I'll tell you that in general, outdoor recreation is really exploding as a new industry in North Carolina. And so something just as simple as parks and game lands and bike paths and greenways and things of that nature, people are really going out of their way to take advantage of those opportunities in recent years, more so than ever before. Goal number 3 under health and wellness, encourage policies that assure healthy environments and maintain Caswell's good air quality. The point here was to assure future development does not jeopardize air quality by developing regulations for noxious uses. The one thing that I can point to here as a mark of progress was that the county adopted the high impact development ordinance in 2020, which really aims at creating a much larger buffer between what you might categorize as a noxious use and a residence or a church or other similar facilities. Section number 3, agriculture and rural preservation. Goal number 1 here, to construct an ag center for the county. And they've got listed quite a few things. Number 3, Mr. Foster, to your point, the facility for food processing, cold storage, meeting space, and farmers market, similar to the point that you made earlier. And then point number 4, kind of a marketing brand of Caswell Fresh for agriculture in general. Obviously, this is probably the biggest component of the comprehensive plan that you might say has been accomplished or is being accomplished, is the Center for Education and Agricultural Development in Pelham. But specific on the points on the previous slide too, you may say that basically all of these have been accomplished. Instead of the previous point talked about comparing what a future ag center could look like, so one in Virginia and another area. Similar to that, I know that PCC has now has a credit program agreed to with NCA&T University, where you can earn credits through the PCC Ag Business Program, and they will now transfer to NCA&T. And I think that's in place for several other universities as well. Point number 2, the entire or a large part of the funding for the seed project came about because of a PCC and county agreement that took advantage of the Connect NC bond, which was passed in 2016. To your point earlier, the amenities planned for this project are obviously the agricultural business technology program, an after-school program, small engine repair, welding, a food hub, incubator farm, extension office programs, health clinic, food retail, and nature trails. And in talking with our extension director about this, there's not really a comprehensive marketing program for agriculture, but I did find on the Chamber of Commerce website that they offer a farmer's toolkit training program where farmers can get training in getting their farm and what they offer on social media, taking good pictures, reaching out, developing email lists and things of that nature, kind of merging from the earth agricultural practices with modern communication practices.
Still,
I'm sorry.
yes, sir.
Can we go back?
Now, anytime you want to give me a break
Okay.
to talk.
If we go back, I want to make sure also that we are emphasizing, and you might do it later on, technology. And things that we are doing at the community college to improve technology, welding, computer science, a lot of things that we're doing. Because we've got to get ready for the job market when we look at all of these manufacturers. InFast, the electric car company is coming here. Boom is coming here in Greensboro. We got Toyota battery coming here. We have got to make sure that we can train our folks to handle and take on these new jobs that's going to be paying good money. So there has to be somewhere in here that we emphasize the technology that we're trying to add in the community college. It might not be here in Casper County, but they can take classes over there at Person County, and it's well worth a ride. And if we get enough people, we can bring classes here in Casper County.
Sure, absolutely.
But right now, I'm just afraid that we might not have enough people to handle the job market that's coming on with all these new jobs, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, if the board wants to make a recommendation that there's a kind of a renewed focus on some of the trade skills, types of professions, or striving to make county facilities available for that type of training, or any number of things. I think if the board wanted to make that recommendation, you absolutely could.
I'll just say, maybe we get to PCC here to talk about it.
Yeah, and Emily was going to come back for today's meeting. Emily Buchanan from PCC. I think she had another meeting, but I let her know about the next meeting on May the 24th, and I think she's going to try to get that. Goal number 3 for ag and rural preservation: establish growth opportunities for farmers by promoting alternative practices and specialty crops. They would do this by promoting alternative farming operations like greenhouses, solar farms, viticulture, and specialty crops, identifying farming opportunities for vacant and underutilized land, and participating in incubator farm programs. This one was a little bit difficult because I think this is a type of situation where this responsibility doesn't necessarily fall to any one person. You know, the extension office has their programs, but I don't know that they're you know, identifying opportunities for vacant land. I think farmers come to them and they have an idea, they help them through that, but I'm not sure that they're necessarily identifying vacant land. And the alternative farming operations, greenhouses and things of that nature, in talking with our extension office, that's really on a farm by farm basis. If a farmer decides they want to do that, then they'll help them through it.
But with seed, if I'm not mistaken, I'm almost pretty sure they're going to be leasing plots to farmers.
Right, and I did put a check mark there because I know that there's an incubator farm planned for the seed campus, and that was on the previous slide as well. Okay, section 4.4 of the goals and objectives deals with community infrastructure. And the 4 goals here were to increase levels of communication among governments, officials, and residents, and develop partnerships to achieve common goals. To explore and develop shared use agreements. Number 3, develop an identifiable image or brand to market Caswell County. And number 4, promote and better utilize the game lands located within Caswell County. And I think there's been some mixed results on these. I think it was the special meeting that the commissioners had at the end of January, early February. They had an active recent discussion about better communication by the commissioners and the community at large. And this was everything from, you know, TV monitors in places around the county to better microphones and sound gear in the building, and better communication with the local newspaper. So I think those conversations are happening. For goal number 2, not really sure about any progress in that area. That was the development of shared use agreements. And this was touched on a little bit earlier with Parks and Rec. In the comprehensive plan, this area talks about having a school be open generally for playgrounds and community events and things of that nature. I think that that's going on. I just really don't know a ton about it. For goal number 3, I believe there has been a website and a brand developed for this. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. But like, I think it's still this way, but like the rec department can't use
high school baseball fields or softball fields?
I don't believe so. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I mean, would something like that open that back up?
I think it could, yeah. I think it could. But I guess it would be, that may be a change in school board policy, you know, and so I don't know if it would be best to recommend that the school board change their policy. I don't know what their current policy is. I know that the BY teams, for example, have had a lot of success recently with track and field, softball, some of those other programs. But this might be an area where it's just best to try to talk to the school a little bit more and talk to our Parks and Rec director, because it's just totally out of my wheelhouse.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah. But for goal number 3, there has been a website developed, allincaswellnc.com, and that is a creation of our economic development department. And it actually came about at the same time that the county, the town of Yanceyville, the town of Milton, and the Chamber of Commerce all got new websites. This new website was developed as well. And for goal number 4, to utilize the game lands and promote the game lands. Really unsure about progress in this area too. I think that's another goal that kind of falls in a gray area, because that's really a state-owned property, and individuals go out and do camping or hunting, and that's kind of their own initiative. And I don't know, I think that our Chamber of Commerce is more focused on promoting local businesses than than she is necessarily promoting state game lands. But again, I'm just not 100% sure about this area. We talked about this a little bit earlier under section 4.5 for general land use strategies. They identified 4 potential areas for new ordinances. And basically all of these have actually been accomplished. So as I mentioned earlier, the high impact development ordinance was adopted in 2020. Watershed ordinance is already part of Article 10 of the UDO. We do have a cluster development ordinance in the subdivision ordinance of Article 9 of the UDO. And then obviously we talked earlier about logging regulations. We do have some restrictions for subdivisions on the local level. Then the state has their programs. And then there's obviously forestry management plans that handle the vast majority of it. We are getting to the end here, I promise you. Section 5.1. They also talk about recommendations for implementing this plan. So we kind of went through the various goals and strategies, and this will be some points on how to actually implement those strategies. Point number 1, hold workshops for county commissioners and planning board on how the plan can be adopted. Number 2, implement a staff recommendation on planning related items that come before the planning board and county commissioners. Number 3, make necessary changes to Castle County regulations that are recommended. And number 4, inform citizens of the goals and policies within the comprehensive plan. Kind of some mixed results here. Since I have been county planner, I do not recall any shared workshops between the county commissioners and the planning board. There may have been some prior to my time in 2018, but I can't recall any. For the most part, there is no staff recommendation on planning related items. If you guys will remember, in January, there was a major subdivision that came before the board. The UDO does allow staff recommendations on the adoption of major subdivisions, but I can't identify any other area where there is a staff recommendation allowed for planning related items, either to the planning board or the county commissioners. And I know sometimes that can be frustrating because you guys have questions on my opinion on things, and I can't always share it with you. For the recommended ordinances, we covered this in the previous slide. All of the 4 issues have been taken care of. And I'm really unaware of the public's familiarity with the comprehensive plan. In general, I would venture to guess that probably only a small fraction of Castle County residents are familiar with the comprehensive plan. So the next set of slides get into census data, but are there any questions on anything related to the comprehensive plan before we move on to the next section?
Staff recommendations.
Yeah, so for example, when a cell tower, let's just say hypothetically a cell tower development is proposed, obviously I've got to check all the boxes and make sure that there's a light if it's above a certain height, and there's fencing and there's setbacks and there's site plan approval and things of that nature. And I can inform the board of that, but I can't go a step further, whoever the UDO administrator is. can't go a step further and say, therefore, staff recommends adoption of this plan or approval of this.
So that staff is you.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. That's correct.
Trying to figure that one.
Yeah, and I only speak in broad terms because if I were not the planner, it would be whoever the planner is.
Thank you for putting that together. There's a lot of work, I know.
It's a lot of fun.
Very, very helpful.
Yeah.
So,
Very comprehensive.
So you got the handout as well.
The staff did a good job.
Well, I got to brag on my staff too, because a couple of you might have a handout where every other page is upside down. I could not figure out how to get it right set up. The Amy bailed me out about an hour before the meeting. So you should have that more or less in bulleted form. And I'll be happy to email this presentation to you as well. All right, we're ready to move on to census data?
Sure.
Because there's more. Okay, so what I did here, and I emailed this, I emailed a lot of this to you guys as well, a couple hours before the meeting, because I really just lifted all of this from the Piedmont Tribe Regional Council's website. They did
It's
this
not in the comprehensive plan now, I can see that.
correct, yes.
That's great.
Yeah, and the census data that's in the comprehensive plan is obviously going to be a decade old. This is new data, fresh from 2020. But what I'm going to present to you is really just the top line stuff, just the most important stuff on total population and employment trends and migrating in and out trends and ethnic breakdown and things of that nature. If you really want to dig into the details, we can certainly do that in a future meeting. But I emailed you a link to PTRC's hub of all that information if you want to dig into that. So figure one here is just total population and an ethnic breakdown of Caswell County. As you see there on the top line, let me see if I can move the mouse a little bit. At the beginning of the decade, Caswell County was just shy of 24,000 residents, and we've lost about 1,000 residents from 2010 to 2020. That is a net population loss of about 4.1%. The loss too is accentuated with ethnic minorities. So average white and non-Hispanic loss has only been 3%, but you get down to Black non-Hispanic loss and you're basically at 15%. You have a little bit of growth in Asian non-Hispanic at just about 2%, and a really big growth for other multiracial, other races and multiracial growth in the county. This is just speculation on my part, but what I think this is between 2010 and 2020, you got a lot more people going to ancestry.com. You've got a lot more people, doing genetic research, and maybe they're 5% Native American or something along those lines. My wife, for example, is 1/16 Native American. And so again, this is just an assumption on my part. I think that the average person is now more comfortable or maybe even takes pride in identifying as multiracial. And that's why you see a disproportionate uptick in that data as opposed to 2010. And you'll actually see this if you go on PTRC's website, you'll actually see this for all of the counties of the Piedmont Triad region. So Randolph, Alamance, no matter where you go, there's a disproportionate uptick in multiracial ethnic self-identification.
Does this mean that these are people that's moving out and also people that are dying?
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure, but I assume so. Yeah. Yeah, between death and moving out, I would assume that's what's accounted for.
That's not tracked in census data.
Yes.
Yeah.
Should be.
Well, I meant, so that you could ascribe a cause or an attribute. Is that in the data?
Not that I saw, but again, if you dig through the PTRC data, it may be in there somewhere.
It's an interesting question.
And there is, I think in a later slide here, there's an age breakdown of Caswell County residents, and obviously it skews older, and older people are more likely to die than younger people. So I would assume that death is one of the large factors in population decline. Figure 2 here, this looks broadly at the Piedmont Triad as a whole. This is all of the counties within the Piedmont Triad. And you notice a trend here. Really, by and large, the rural counties are losing population. Caswell County's got a population loss of just over 4%. We are now the smallest county by population here at 22,736, but you see the urban counties and maybe an ex-urban county, Alamance County, is really just exploding.
But I guarantee you, after the pandemic, the trend is going the other way. People are moving out into the country versus staying.
Yeah, and I think you raised an interesting point too there, and I'm glad that you raised it. You know, this census took place smack dab in the middle of a pandemic, so you didn't have the same type of door-to-door activity that you did in previous censuses. However, you did have more connectivity and more familiarity with the internet. So I think there's a little bit of a gray area as to how accurate are these numbers based on the factors of decreased door-to-door activity and a pandemic, but yet maybe increased internet self-reporting because of ease with internet access and expanded internet. Figure 3 here, these are commuting patterns in and out of the county every single day. So the top line information there is probably the most important. Non-commuters, persons living and working in Caswell, people fortunate like myself who walk to work. There are about 1,800 of us. Total Caswell County residents in the workforce, about 8,500. Persons working in Caswell County, 3,019. And net commuting outflow, 5,401. So that's a total breakdown of almost 80% of eligible working age persons in Caswell County commute out of the county for work every single day. 78 to 23%. Which
But the total only 8,500 out of 23,000 people are working.
that's what the data says.
Those are good responses.
Yeah, and the biggest inflow point of Caswell County residents is Alamance County. So more people, this was actually a little bit surprising to me, more people are commuting to Alamance County for work than are commuting to Danville for work. I thought it would actually be the other way around.
The Caswell County residents in the workforce, how would they count farmers?
That's a good question because you often see a little asterisk next to this data that says non-farm labor, right? Non-farm workforce. So
I mean, I got it. What that says is we got 3,000 people, including farmers. Well, I think workers, they consider seasonal workers. I don't know how they count that either.
Right, this is probably just a question that related to commuting.
Resident.
Farmer probably answer that question.
That's a big part of our workforce in Gamble County.
No, I think Scott's got it. It's the heading, Caswell County commuting pattern, so probably you're compelled.
Probably ask you, do you commute this other?
yeah. So this is the final figure under census data. And this, I think, is a little bit incomplete if I remember from the website. I think this was data that spanned from maybe 2009 to 2014. So I don't think that it's perfectly up to date, but I think it gives a good sense of some of the migration patterns. So these are people full-time moving in and out of Caswell County, not commuting for work, but actually relocating to and from Caswell County. So you've got Orange County there, a net inflow of 504 and only 12 moving out to Orange County. You've got a breakdown into some other states, and then you've got some totals there. And to my surprise, a net gain of 810. But obviously that data conflicts with what we saw previously with a net population loss for the county. So again, I think this is a little bit incomplete. I think this data only goes up to about 2013 or 14, but I still think that it's important to see, by and large, the trend of moving to neighboring counties or nearby states or throughout the southeast there, Florida, Georgia, Virginia, I think those trends are important for the board to know as you make certain decisions here moving forward. Any questions on census data? Like I said, I emailed you a link to PTRC and there's a whole lot more data that they've gathered. It's really good stuff. It's mostly just top line, big picture numbers. Unless we got into a contract with PTRC, I don't think it's going to get a deep dive like we did for the original comprehensive plan numbers. But I still think that the board can make some really good informed decisions with the top line data that we've got just from PTRC point.
But just taking this data and incorporating it into the comprehensive plan, just so it's updated.
Right.
Is that something that you plan to do, or is there something else we need to?
Yeah, if the board instructs me to do that, I'll be happy to do it. I think a good example might be, taking a look at the inflow versus outflow patterns. Let's just be generous and say it's 70-30. I think almost anybody you talk to in local leadership would prefer that Caswell County residents stay and work in Caswell County. So a data point like that might just help you inform you guys as you talk about future job development or utilities expansion or any number of things. With that in mind, to try to keep people here as opposed to let them go out of the county for work every day. That kind of thing. And that's a great segue to transportation. All right, so this is current data. These are projects actually currently under construction in Caswell County. I did not know about this, but I talked to Jason Julian, our regional NCDOT director, and he got me in touch with Kelly Larkins with PTRC as well, and shared some really valuable data. So there's currently a resurfacing going on of NC Highway 119, 18 different sections, and I guess these are 18 different intersections of secondary roads. And this actually came before the board. I think I shared this information with you guys maybe about a year ago when they let me know that 119 was getting a resurfacing upgrade. And so as far as we know, they're underway now. Replacing bridge number 19 over Lynch Creek on Dave Smith Road, installing ADA compliant curb ramps at various routes, relatively small project there, only 181,000. And then installing thermoplastic pavement marking lines along various secondary roads. So I guess those are kind of the road reflectors that you see when you're driving at night. And then let me give you all this handout, because this handout's a little bit more comprehensive than just the bullet points that I'm going to show you. So we are in Division 7 of North Carolina's NCDOT, landscape and region that they manage. And we're grouped in with, it may be all the PTRC, Piedmont Triad counties, Guilford, Rockingham, all the regional counties that you would assume. But there are 5 specifically in here that relate to Caswell County. And these go in chronological order. So number 1 there, install sidewalks, crosswalk, extend sidewalks, and install flashing beacons in the town of Milton. This is actually going to break ground soon in August of 2020, and the cost is just shy of $300,000. Intersection improvements for an all-way stop at the intersection of NC Highway 87 and Kerr Chapel Road, set to begin next year, and a cost of only $22,000. Safety improvements for NC Highway 87 and Brown Chapel Road, set to begin 2025, cost of $400,000. Replacing the bridge on NC Highway 86 over Hogan's Creek, that's pretty far north, almost to Virginia. Projected year 2025, cost of 6.3. And then the big 800-pound gorilla in the room is construct passing lanes and shoulder improvements along 86 from Highway 158 to the Virginia state line. Now slated to begin in a decade, unfortunately, at a total projected cost in today's dollars of $191 billion.
Today's dollars.
In today's dollars. All those are incorporated in this broader timeline that I've sent you. And I would assume that they're subject to change based on prioritization, based on funding for NCDOT projects.
At the last meeting, you said everybody was backtracked 5 years.
That's what we've been told, yeah, and I think Commissioner Ostraker might know more about this than I can, but when people stop driving in 2020, they stopped paying gas taxes. The gas taxes dried up the NCDOT coffers, so a lot of stuff really got, backflow. Then you got labor costs, material costs, everything's going up, so it's only made all the projects that much more expensive.
Matthew, who's in charge of, like improvements of intersections as a whole of our?
So our regional director is down in Jason Julian, and the region, our sub-region is just Rockingham and Castle counties.
So Jason Julian is the one, yeah, because I had a number of people coming up to me asking about these intersections. Wanting to know about turn signals, caution lights,
Yeah.
et cetera. I mean, they're really getting concerned because 86 is turning into a daggum racetrack. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if anybody's noticed it lately, but it's done got out of control.
There's 2 died last week.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe somebody put another bug in his ear, I don't know.
Well, and that is without doubt something that this board can do is you kind of develop your recommendations to try to get Castle County projects higher up the priority list.
We talked about that last meeting, 86 in particular, trying to increase that to 4 lanes.
Well,
Which
the
ain't nice.
increase on the list, right? I mean, that's just phase 1 of what's needed, but.
Right.
That's just from here to down.
And I would venture to guess too that project was set in place and kind of pieced together prior to the casino announcement.
And I think
That's right.
Yeah.
Originally was scheduled for 2023. I was going.
Ron, do y'all need a caution light or a stop light with 119? It's 86.
Yeah, there's, actually Sheriff brought up one, they said they talked to Miss, what was it, Jules?
Jason Jules.
Yeah, Jules, yeah, but I don't know if they hadn't heard back from her, or they're not going to the proper channels or what. And then there's a number of, like I said, caution lights and arrow turn signals, and, especially in this congested, coming through, through Yanceyville, so to speak. I don't know, just a bunch of people brought it up.
There's no telling how much traffic we will have
Yeah,
next September for the Blue Ridge Rock Festival.
that's right. So, we got to get ahead of it now, being serious, regardless of what goes on in 86, on the full lanes or whatever.
Well, and I didn't know this either until I started doing some research on this, but Mayor Alvin Foster is the chairman of the committee that basically organizes the prioritization of projects.
Oh, wow.
Now,
He
even
was. I'm not,
is he not still?
I don't know. That's David Owen.
Now, inevitably, they have their processes, they've got their priorities, they've got higher population counties, obviously, that exist in the region. Even though he's chairman or very active or whatever the case may be, I would assume his influence is still equal among the rest. But I still think that it's an opportunity for the planning board, the commissioners, anybody involved in this process to try to, reprioritize these types of things, especially given the casino coming into Denver.
On Hogan's Creek.
Yeah.
And I thought Hogan's Creek was on 158, one towards Reading.
It is.
So Highway 86, Hogan's Creek, is that a second Hogan's Creek?
Crosses 86. It's the closest bridge to Virginia.
On the way to Danbrook.
It's the one after you pass the Providence Convenient, or then you go way downhill down at the bottom, that bridge. Is that correct? Okay, so there's your comprehensive plan 2022 analysis with census data and NCDOT updates.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hogan.
I can, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Put a lot of thought and effort into this. We really appreciate it. It's very detailed. Thank you.
So Chair, are we going to make a suggestion that this is included in the comprehensive plan?
But if that's the pleasure of the board, I only have one recommendation that, with Mr. Singleton being here discussing the Forestry Service and state statute, if we could just remove the paragraph about the logging regulations, so there's no confusion, and then move forward with that. Any other recommendations or changes that anyone sees?
I think, I mean, just as step one, I would like to recommend incorporating the census data, just to update the plan, right? I don't think that's a major overhaul, but that's just updating the charts to have that. It's gonna be good information. And then, I don't know, I think there's quite a few things that we could make some additional recommendations on as we think through this information that's been given.
So in terms of incorporating the census data, do you envision going through and replacing the items in the comprehensive plan that refer to the 2010 census data, or maybe just an appendix in the back?
I would say, well, let's say you have a chart here, right, and it has previous year data, just add additional columns to include the 2020 data. So seeing the trends over several census periods is really, really valuable information.
And Mr. Oakley, I don't see an issue as long as there's no objection from the board to actually incorporating the entire plan Mr. Oakley has presented today.
I agree, Chair.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think it's good. And
I mean, we can always add to it later.
And I think the results that you presented here, I think that would also be something good that the board of commissioners should be, whether that's just, by email or whether you go and present to them, I think they should be aware of this same information.
Well, especially kind of the scorecard. I mean,
Yes, yeah. It's-
And maybe some additions could be made.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And, I thought as I was working through this, I kind of felt like it wasn't entirely appropriate for me to answer because, like I mentioned, Corey from Economic Development or Amanda from the Chamber would probably know much, much better than I do about certain things that were in there. Certainly health and wellness. I mean, I got to plan fitness a few times a week and try to eat healthy, and that's kind of the end of my health and wellness knowledge,
Right. There's a lot of this plan that's not in your jurisdiction.
Right.
I don't see any issue with contacting them and ask them to come.
Yeah, well, and if the board wanted to invite them for the next meeting, we could certainly do that.
Yeah, I thought we discussed talking with the Chamber of Economic Development Director at the beginning.
I think you need to talk to the health.
Hey. It's supposed to be in here at 2:30. You know how much longer it'll be?
About 4 hours.
Castle County Partnership for Children's advertised pre-K sign up.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I had no idea, but we've got one more item on the agenda. Well, we have several items. We'll wrap it up as fast as we can.
Okay, I'm sorry, normally, it works out and the planning board's done and the next person comes in, it just happens that we double book this time. I say what?
They need the whole room. Can we put up a petition?
Let me ask how many people will be. I'd like to do that. Do y'all mind pausing and? Let's do it.
No, we can do that. Yeah, we just have to shift the tables around a little bit.
I need to see how many, because they've got different institutes coming in, signing up kids for kindergarten.
Okay.
So I need to see how many people they think that will have.
We'll try to wrap it up in the meantime. Thank you, Mark.
And let's do this, if you guys want, email me additional changes, recommendations, anything that the comprehensive plan, and I'll try to incorporate it by the next meeting. We can take it that way.
Why not include this in the comprehensive plan? But this is part of your transportation, well, it's not part of, but
Yeah.
I see a lot of this stuff that.
Well, the way
Yeah,
that, yeah, the way that will be included is the board to say, we recommend a new prioritization of highway projects. The board, in light of the casino, for example, or in light of additional traffic at downtown Yancville, or the board recommends higher prioritization on XYZ projects. Yeah. Okay.
All right, thank you, man.
Yes, sir.
So if we could, we'll talk with Matt between now and the next meeting, and keep this on the agenda, keep it going, keep adding to it.
Yeah.
Thanks for all your effort. Next, under new business, is it Mr. Chaplain?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for patiently waiting for us today. And thank you for being here with the UDO amendment application. Mr. Hoagland, if you could just briefly give us a summary.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So David Chapton of Reedsville has submitted a proposed amendment to the UDO, which is available for any citizen to do if they wish. This amendment we'll place on today's agenda primarily focuses on allowing RV parks to be placed in flood zones. And then I think there's some other proposed language about changes to the existing RV park language.
Now, Mr. Hoagland, explain to us the difference between the text amendment and then variance.
So a text amendment is just simply to actually change the language of the ordinance. You know, right, like what we're dealing with now is currently the UDO says no RV park may be established in a flood zone. This proposed text amendment would allow RV parks, it would do away with that language and say RV parks may be erected in a flood zone. An ordinance or a variance would be,
1 second.
I'm sorry, since it's a pre-K thing, we're just gonna let them take over the children's area. I just need to grab, y'all can stay here, we're just gonna grab some tables.
fantastic.
We got it. We got it. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks for coming, Dave.
Thank you, Ron.
A variance, on the other hand, would be, let's say that there was a proposed RV park, and based on the size of the lot, or the shape of the lot, or whatever, you know, maybe the developer could not achieve the required setbacks for one of the property lines, so they would request a variance because the shape of the lot makes it unable to meet the standards of the ordinance.
Okay, so I assume, given what the property owner desires, is the text amendment the only option?
Well, the way that this came about was Mr. Chapman came in with a standard RV park application right outside of the town of Milton, right along the Dan River
Racetrack Road.
corridor. And upon reviewing his site plan, it was determined that the vast majority of the RV park was in a flood zone. And so because the UDO does not allow RV parks in flood zones, we had to deny his application. He then went back to the drawing board and said, I'm going to do some research and propose an amendment. And that's the application that you have before you today.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. All right, Chair recognizes Mr. Chapman. Thank you.
Well, here's my presentation. I'm not computer literate that well, so do it the old school way.
You have one?
I still have my copy. Yeah.
You get one second. Pretty much. Yeah, RV campground. Not allowed in flood zone. And just to let you know, the Blue Ridge Rock Fest, they're parking at the fairgrounds in Virginia and pretty much bypassing the whole county. So we won't see much economic from that as this speak.
Is that the Pennsylvania County Fairgrounds? on
Yes.
Highway 62?
Yeah, they don't want a lot of people busting. They still don't have enough parking.
They're charging $200 to park there, driving through buses through the town of Milton, getting Racetrack Road, and that's it. So, and once they're in, they're not allowed out. Except for that.
Well, some of them also say like 70% of participants will be camping. That's so,
Well, there's not enough camping sites there
well, that's what,
for them
yes.
as well, so. So anyways, recreational vehicle is the current definition is just goes 1 through 4 on that sheet you're looking at. But for number 5, I propose being fully licensed, ready for highway use. It's in the ordinances, but it's hard to understand unless you actually read every single page of, every single sentence of that ordinance. And the reason for that is a lot of times these, it clears up definition. You have to search for the ordinance that states to be fully licensed, ready for highway uses. And the other day, you driving up to the land, prime example, I got an RV on the side of the road with a broken axle that's been sitting there for 3 weeks, actually passed today coming up here. And reason being that is it is clearly stated, which goes back to my RVs being in the floodplain, allows that vehicle to be able to move and get out of there, which denies people, it just makes it safer.
You wanna, I guess, have open discussion as he's going through this, or wait till the end, how do you wanna manage this?
We'll just, we'll let him finish up.
Okay.
And Mr. Chapman, we may have some questions for you.
Go for it. So, yeah, just that, I mean, this. I know a lot of people that lived in RV parks. My brother lived in RV park in California. They lived there 365. And they actually have to move over one spot. So every 180 days. Because to rotate their tires and do all that stuff. So, but you just let it, you know, it happens if you let a trailer sit, your tires are gonna get dry rotted. The axle will get rusted, everything just starts breaking. And it just, yeah. So then the other one that's not very important is the UDO 9.42.11, and it says allows 100 piece of recreational vehicles on residential lots can be there for 180 days. And temporary placement and permanent must be permitted once every 365 days. The reason I said this is a lot of people with economic way things are going right now, a lot of people are changing over to RVs to live there. And there's one I passed this week, well, there's actually multiple ones, but one I passed this weekend I took a picture on, which is a couple pages back, that is sitting there on the side of the road, complete eyesore. I know y'all seen this one before, you know what I'm talking about. And that ordinance, changing that to 80 days or 90 days would actually allow you to get those vehicles so they can't build stuff on there like decks and canopies and the whole 9 yards, because driving through, you see that and it's just like, we're down in the middle of nowhere, no one cares.
Yeah, and Matthew, just to make the distinction for everyone here, there are two sections here. One speaks about RV parks and one speaks about RVs on
Individual property.
individual
Yes,
properties. I think this one would fall into that category of an individual property, which has a different criteria.
Correct.
Than an
Yes.
RV park, but anyway, I just want to make sure everybody knew the distinction there, right?
Yes, and actually, there's another one I passed on my property where they built, it looks nice, but they have a deck on there and this insulation around the sides, but it's an RV and it's not safe. And I was up in North Dakota for a year working oil fields, living in RVs. And RVs are not designed to live that long because you collect too much stuff, you have too much clothing, you have cleaning materials. RVs are designed for little get away for a week or the weekend or something like that. They don't have the room and it's just a hazard. And they become eyesores and they're not ready for highway use because they've been sitting so long. And it's just turns out no good. But that's, those two items are not the priority. The priority is actually the 9.4.24, which at the very end of that states that no recreational vehicle park shall be located in any flood.
9.41.2.4,
Yes,
the final sentence, no recreational vehicle park shall be located in any flood zone.
in the flood zone. I'm trying to get that changed to floodway. Floodway, turn 2 pages or 3 pages. There's a diagram of a floodplain and a floodway. The floodway is right in the channel of the river. So on the dam river, when the water comes up 30 foot, which has been known to do, you've got 30 foot of water moving at you 15, 20 miles an hour, and everything in that path is completely, totally destroyed. Flood plain is on the outskirts of that, on the flood fringe. And when that occurs, that water just slowly rises, and so there's not much current. And still causes damage. My parents got hit by Hurricane Florence in 2000, whenever that was, a couple of years ago. And they were in the floodplain. But it causes damage, but it's not catastrophic damage where stuff is getting swept away. It's just more water rising. And then in floodplain, local codes, I mean, state codes and national codes allow you to build in floodplains. They do not allow you to build in floodplains unless it's grandfathered in. Let's see, what is it? Flood zone. FEMA has produced maps that tell you what a flood zone is. I'm not very good at presentations, but
That's okay.
I'm an electrician by trade. But yeah, flood zones, FEMA knows, has different areas that the percentages of chance of flooding, what damage can occur, and all that stuff. And I have them laid out here on this paper. But yeah, but floodways, I'm just trying not to get away from them. Now we go to the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP. That's an industry standard for floodplain management regulations. And they do not have limitations on RVs. And they actually state that RV parks are often a good use of floodplains. And a lot of stuff you read about floods comes from the NFIP. And next page, I got stating what it is about RVs that they had on their paper. Actually, the pages were, yeah. On 548, recreational vehicle means. And then you turn the page again. The purpose of this requirement is to prevent recreational vehicles from being permanently placed in a floodplain unless they are well protected from flooding, like a manufactured home. And I feel that ordinance is more towards manufactured homes or RV parks like people are living in than actually a campground. So then it lists what their AO zones and some different types of zones are there.
Campground will have full hookup.
See, that's the thing, yes, I want to have a full hookup on there. Currently with the ordinances, I'm allowed to have a primitive campsite, which primitive campsite means no hookups, you have a bathhouse located somewhere. I'm allowed to have that. I'm also allowed to build a house or a couple of houses down there on stilts per code. I'm allowed to do that. So I'm allowed to have a campground. I'm allowed to have a house or multiple houses down there that have electricity, plumbing, water, the whole 9 yards. I'm not allowed to have a campground. And just it doesn't make any sense to me that we're not allowed to have that.
I just want to clarify something for the board's consideration. So what you're reviewing today is not Mr. Chapman's RV site proposal.
No.
So if the board decided that allowing RV parks in a flood zone was a good idea, then what you would do is recommend adoption of this to the county commissioners. The county commissioners would have to have a public hearing, and then they would ultimately be responsible for amending the UDO to
to make this change, just like they would any type of UDO amendment, whether it was shooting range facilities or RV parks or anything else. Then once the ordinance, if the ordinance were to be changed, then Mr. Chapman would resubmit his site plan for approval. So you're not approving any type of site plan today. You're just making a determination on whether or not it would be wise to allow RV parks in flood zones and then an ordinance change as a result.
And if we don't allow it, what happens?
So technically, you have a few courses of action here. So this is the review and recommendation period. Like I said, anyone can propose an amendment to the UDO. Then that's heard by the planning board, which is what we're doing right now. You have a maximum of 45 days from the date of the planning board meeting to make a recommendation on the application. If a recommendation is made to the commissioners by the planning board concerning an amendment to change the text of the ordinance, the recommendation shall be as follows: adoption of the amendment as written, adoption of the amendment as revised by the planning board, so you may make changes to Mr. Chapman's amendment, or 3, to deny the amendment. Those are your 3 options. And since you have a 45-day window, you still could bring this back up at the next meeting or have a special meeting or address this in a number of ways in that next 45-day period.
It's also the option of the variances.
No, there's not an option of the variant. Well, I suppose, yeah, you could vary the site plan to allow
This specific
this
plan, this specific
in
site,
a flood zone
would that have to go to the Board of
adjustment.
Adjustment?
But then you're basically
It's a
saying,
one-off deal.
so it would have, the variance is typically only granted if it's a unique hardship that is peculiar to the property, or if no other use can be made of the property. And you would basically be saying that the Board of Adjustment would be saying that we would allow a variance for any similar flood zone in the county, which is not really necessarily in keeping with the intent there.
We have maps of it. Photography.
Map of this, Mr. Chapman's property. Sure, yeah, we can bring that up. And again, you know, you're not really considering a specific property. You're more considering a broad policy change about allowing RVs and parks and flood zones. But I can.
We are not considering the property.
It's not my property
Correct.
at the moment.
Yeah,
Like I said, the ordinance would need to be amended first, then Mr. Chapman would resubmit his application.
I mean, there's really 3 basic things here. He's recommending amendment from 180 days to 90 days, right? So that's a discussion item. Right? The next one is removing the sentence that says, hey, you can't have an RV park in a flood zone, right?
And changing it to floodway.
And changing it to floodway, right? So those are the key things that
Yes.
you're really trying to
Yes,
hone in on here, right?
yes.
So, yeah, I mean, to me, this discussion about could you allow RV parks in a flood zone? I think that's the one that I really want to wrap my head around. And the thing that I guess the thing that I would be most concerned about there in terms of, and I'm not an RV park expert by any means, but I know you have dump sites, right? And, you know, in places where they have allowed RV parks in flood zones, does that have some unique requirement for example, dump sites and dumpsters for trash and those things? Do those still have to be outside of that flood zone? You know, the fact that I think your recommendation to have they got to be roadworthy. Obviously, I think that would be a great addition to this regardless, because if you potentially are going to have a flood that was going to impact these things, people got to be able to move them out, you know, with at least a 12 or 24-hour notice. And I think there could also be some additional language that would be required to say, an RV park owner has to disclose some information about, hey, this park is in a flood zone, therefore you need to be aware of this and be prepared to do X, Y, Z within X number of hours in the case of a flood. Anyway, I think there's a lot to think about and consider here with this.
And to that point, I read through all your information.
Good deal.
And one of the things that you said was that campers have their cell phones and they can be notified if there's gonna be a flood. I totally disagree there, because I am a camper. When I go camping, I put my phone inside and I try not to even look at it until I leave. So that's not a way of notifying someone that's the floods are coming.
Well,
And
it's
all my
also,
friends do the same thing.
it's also responsibility of the campground owner to do that, because those people are in his liability. That's why they're paying to stay at your place, because you're overlooking their safety and knowing they are in the floodplain. Just,
I don't know. There's gotta be some provision for making sure this is.
I agree.
So,
Rockingham County, they have some campgrounds on the damn river.
Yeah.
I mean, make it, look up there, rules and regulations on that to see.
I'm sure there's already things written down that cover all of this, but just making these changes as proposed, I don't think it's gonna be sufficient. I think we accept any or all of these. I'm just saying, I don't think you can do just this without considering other things, right?
But another thing is, none of the surrounding counties have that ordinance in their UDO.
The other surrounding counties, in other words, don't prohibit flood.
No, and there are actually several campgrounds in flood zones. And right here, I actually have 8 of them. We're gonna look at this.
And I think you referenced that in the original information that you sent out, right?
So it's widely used, FEMA allows it. And yeah, this is one of the few counties that does not allow that to happen.
I apologize, but I got to leave early. I got to pick up the children.
One thing I'll mention too that may be worth the board's consideration is there is a threshold by which RV park proposals come before the planning board. And I'll let you mention this during the planning department updates, but if a RV park does not propose to disturb more than 1 acre of total property, meaning the driveway in, the campsites, any, shared facilities or whatever, if it's less than 1 acre, then it can be approved administratively. In other words, I can approve it. What you could do is, in addition to any type of flood zone changes, you could require that all RV park proposals come before the planning board. Or you could suggest that as a change. And you could have a conditional use permit process where you simultaneously attach conditions to approval. So a condition of dump facilities outside the flood zone, or signs notifying patrons of the flood zone, or emergency system alerts, different conditions as you approve the development that relate specifically to flood zone development. Does that make sense?
And you don't have full hookups at this time.
No, I don't have anything at this time because
Right, but if it was approved, you would have that.
I would be in the ground tomorrow.
But the only, well, that was what I was getting to. So if you got this solid waste and it comes to flood.
No, well, that goes back to environmental health and what they approve and not. Also, on my property, just my property, not talking about anyone else's, my elevation is above the flood zone. Majority of it is on top of stuff. And I actually have both sides of the road where I'm able to put a dump station up there if I need to.
So your site will perk then?
Oh yeah, it's already parked.
That's what I. And this is not, again, getting to the point about, this is more for my education. With that, in the research that you've done, then that would make sense. That not allowing a dump site in the flood zone would still.
Yes, it
That would
just,
make sense, but you actually have.
I've been in contact with the state of North Carolina for their allowing me to do what I need to do. Can't think of the guy's name, but I've talked to him a couple times. Because it's actually out of Caswell County's scope of approving that for RV campground, because it goes to a state level.
So we would have to, we could, option is come up with a case by case basis, and we gotta come up with wording or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily a case by case basis, but basically it's a conditional use permit process where you would say, the planning board is going to review any future RV site plans, park plans, no matter their size. And upon review, you can attach conditions to approval.
But man, you currently, your authority permit plans.
If it's less than 1 acre of disturbed area.
And you attached also the Rockingham County ordinance that deals with RV campgrounds.
I believe
Yes.
Mr. Shackleton did.
I saw that in one drive.
And Alamance, and I've listed several. And actually Carter County just passed it to allow RVs in floodplain zones. Very recently, in the past 2 years, they actually amended their UDO.
How many cameras?
Yes, what?
So maybe they'll allow me to.
No.
No, actually, I can get about, how many was it, about 30 down in the bottom?
There's a provision that talks about the number of RV campsites per acre. I can't recall it off the top of my head, but there's a metric in the development ordinance. But dimensional requires 50 campsites per net acre. 15 campsites per net acre.
Yeah, I know you authorized.
Yeah.
So there was something about the percentage of the overall. So many campsites. A certain percentage of the acreage.
Well, yeah, there has to be a shared use space or like an open space, open recreational space.
Yeah.
On there as well. And that has to be a dimensional minimum.
You know, I think it's a good thing to look at, certainly. I think there's some improvements that we could be made independently of what you're recommending, considering those things as well. I think there's some other consideration. Improve it.
Man, we have 45 days from today to.
That's correct.
Because like y'all were talking about an in-seat bike the other day, earlier about
Cycle and see.
the cycling thing. There's nowhere for them to stay. They had a campground that they could actually stay at. You got Hyco Lake campground. That's about it anywhere around here. And you're missing out on the economic, especially with BIR, with all their Blue Ridge Rock Fest and all that stuff. And actually the canoeing on the damn river, a lot of people don't go canoeing on that section because there's nowhere to stay. And it's just, it'll bring economic growth to the area, which will actually help grow the town of Milton economically. And so they can be open at lunchtime and Sundays.
Mr. Hoodman, as it relates to the change from 180 days to 90 days, I remember us having a discussion about this a few years ago. When we implemented our ordinance. Do you recall what the background 180 days was? I think we lowered it from 9 months to a year down to 180 days.
Well, the general requirements for RV parks, I don't believe has changed since the initial adoption of the ordinance in 2013. It says continuous occupancy extending beyond 6 months in any 12-month period shall be presumed permanent occupancy, and that's not allowed in an RV park. With regards to RVs on individual properties, we did change that to where you get 180 days at a time. But previously you could only renew that once a year. So, a year is obviously 365 days. So you have your 180-day chunk, then you got to wait about another 180 days. Then you could renew it again. When we did the 160D changes, we changed that to allow 180 days, and you can turn right around the very next day and do another 180 day.
That's not in the current version that I was looking at.
I've worked with the clerk on getting the 160D changes up on the county website. A copy of the UDO, but for whatever reason, I cannot figure out how to get that thing updated. So it is, that is current ordinance is, you get 180 days and you can renew that thing. At the end of 180, you can renew it again the very next day
For individual lots.
for individual lots.
As it relates to RV parks, how does the 180-day rule apply to RV parks?
It does not.
It doesn't. The only language that's similar is what I just read with the 6 months of occupancy.
And you're proposing that it's 90 days?
Just 90 days for individuals because it takes away the eyesores that you see.
90 days for the RV park or individual?
No,
lots?
individual.
Individual lots.
Yeah.
Individuals on the RV park.
No, not an RV park.
RVs on individual lots,
Yes,
90 days
Yeah.
is your proposal,
yes,
as opposed to currently 180.
yes.
Yeah, what is Person County rule?
I have no idea.
They do a lot of,
I might have it in that stuff I sent you.
yeah, I know they do a lot of people at the power plant. I know several individuals that are doing it.
So what are the other counties doing in reference to that? The 180 to 90 days? Are they doing-
Unless I have. good
What
news,
county?
I
The
don't-
other counties are they doing 180 days?
I will say that I recall when
That's.
when the 180-day renewal
That's right.
period was discussed, I remember the planning board talking about giving property owners more leeway for RV parks on the
It's
fence.
fully licensed.
Have it for 180 days and be able to renew it immediately there again. And I remember also
Yeah, I
mentioning
thought
to the board
all of them basically.
that I had some people come
Yeah,
to my office and talk about how
When they-
for temporary. There's some that,
maybe they maybe lived in Durham,
you know what I'm talking
they had
about.
property here, they want to stay for a while, then travel out west and go to Yosemite National Park or whatever, and then come back. And the 180-day option to renew gave them a lot of flexibility for kind of coming and going, more of a retired, road warrior type of operation.
And the reason is 180 days, if you're on someone's individual lot, at 100, if you're there for 180 days, you become a citizen of that county if you have a mailing address. And the way the economy is going right now, a lot of people are actually moving in to RVs because they can't afford the housing. And if you got a mailing address from that property because you need to get a bill sent, you can go get your driver's license saying you're a permanent resident of that. And with the court systems, try to go get someone evicted right now. Doesn't happen.
Just because I think it's gonna become more and more prevalent and if we do want to do that, I just have to thought about it,
And we got, what, you say 45 days?
but this whole even the on someone's land and being able to renew every 6 months is, I don't know, I think we need to think about this thing.
Why bother to limit? If you can.
Well, exactly, right? If you can just come back and get a new permit every 6 months.
What purpose does the 180?
I mean, it seems like you would at least have to, say that you have moved your RV to make sure that it's still operational and it's not just up on stands, or you physically have to move it, then I could understand that, right? But I'm not sure if that's actually in place. Right?
So there is some language in there that says, same clause with 180 days in renewal. If an RV remains occupied on a parcel of land for more than 180 consecutive days or is situated to be used as a permanent residence, then the temporary placement permit shall be revoked and not issued again for a period of 365 days. So the ordinance is designed to give some flexibility and give people the benefit of the doubt if they want to have an RV on their property for 180 days at a stretch, even if they renew it for another 180 days. But there is language in there and an enforcement mechanism if they basically set it up as a permanent residence. Now, that could be a big if, because we don't really go out looking for violations unless something is particularly egregious.
Yeah.
And it's
This
not.
is where the
we may not
only way
get
it's
a
going to come up
complaint.
is if the neighbor calls,
Right.
right? This is where this comes in.
Could you read that again?
Yeah. I'll read you the full clause. Recreational vehicles on residential lots shall, only be allowed on a parcel of land for up to 180 consecutive days. A temporary placement permit must be permitted once every 365 days for a single parcel of land. If an RV remains occupied on a parcel of land for more than 180 consecutive days or is situated to be used as a permanent residence, then the temporary placement permit shall be revoked and not issued again for a period of 365 days. And the next clause says that it shall be fully licensed and ready for highway use.
So it could be, just can't be occupied for more than 180 days, but it can remain on the property.
Yeah, and it doesn't say this, but I remember this during our discussion when we changed it, is ideally you bring it off the lot, bring it back in. Move it, maybe move it to a different location, but it's.
That's not
At
prescribed.
that, but at that point, it kind of becomes an honor system.
I remember the discussion would be about hunting and wildlife. Mr. Harris, do you recall, I remember there being discussion about there being a lot of hunters coming to the county. Use the RVs during hunting season and remove them. I
I think
recall
that's
that.
where the primary discussion was, but I don't think we were at that point considering this. They don't, new phenomenon where lots of people may consider just. That's kind of, I think that's a new word type thing that's occurring.
Typically, these guys just bring them in and then 6 months they gone.
All right. As far as eyesores, I don't know, I don't have an RV or a camper, but I've seen a lot of fancy RVs and campers over here.
Now, I've seen some good ones, but then you also drive through these roads. I actually drove around this Sunday just to drive around. And you wouldn't believe how many you saw with tarps over top of them, with decks built to the side. I actually saw one nice one with a flowers basket hanging out the side of it. So they live there year round.
If you would like to lodge a formal complaint, then.
Mr. Hogan, in those type of scenarios, how would the building inspections department intervene?
In those scenarios, I don't think the building inspections department would intervene. I think it would be the planning department.
Okay.
I think it would be this provision that doesn't allow permanent occupancy for more than 180 days or to be situated as a permanent residence. And a lot of times you can tell, I mean, if somebody's got flower pots out and a sign out front that says, "Welcome to our home," and they've got it up on blocks or whatever the case may be, it's pretty evident that they situated it as a permanent residence. I've never gotten that type of call and complaint. I've gotten calls and complaints for, somebody just kind of bringing in an RV on a property. One night it's not there and the next day it's there. And they don't seem to be hooked into well and septic. They got trash everywhere. They start showing up on a piece of property, cutting down trees, clear cutting and stuff. I get those types of complaints, but I've never gotten a complaint where somebody says, I've been looking across the street for 2 years now, and Bob is just over there living in an RV. Can you do something about it?
In all those situations, basically complaint driven.
Yes, they're a complaint-driven enforcement office. Yes, sir.
All right, do we want to try to digest all this?
Yeah.
There's a lot to digest.
Put this on next month.
Sure. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chapman.
Do we need a special meeting for this?
We just keep it on the agenda. Yeah.
And if you have, again, like the comprehensive plan, if you have ideas, the board may, again, in Article 4, it talks about you can recommend approval, recommend changes and approval, or recommend denial. So if you have recommended changes, feel free to email those to me between now and the next meeting, and I can try to incorporate those and maybe have something a little bit more concrete that the board can take action on.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. Thanks, Mr. Chapman.
In the meantime, I'll be doing a primitive campsite ground down in the exact same area.
That's perfectly fine. Have fun.
All right, Mr. Hoagland, under planning department updates, any updates on the problem?
Well, we have one more item under new business.
Oh, excuse me, the hydro, right. Hydro non-conformance deadline review and recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we briefly discussed this at the tail end of the last meeting. as you know, the HIDO was adopted in December of 2021 and gave existing non-conforming properties a period of 1 year to submit site plans and other documentation to be grandfathered in. We did not get any applications for site plans or requests for grandfathering in that 1 year period. So after some discussion amongst the county commissioners, they, correct me if I'm wrong here, they have indicated an interest in seeing an extension to allow those existing properties to be grandfathered in. And in discussion that I had with the county manager, this is around mid-March. He said, let's just shoot for 6 months, and we kind of landed at the September 15th timeframe there, because that was about exactly 6 months from mid-March. So this is, again, just a review and recommendation. The county attorney has suggested that the planning board review and make a recommendation before the commissioners take final action. So what you have before you here is a draft amendment to the existing ordinance, which would just simply say owners and operators of non-conforming uses shall have until September 15th, 2022 to apply at no cost for a non-conformance permit. And then later on says failure to apply for the non-conformance permit within the period will constitute a violation of the article.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. I looked briefly under Article 7 of the UDO non-conforming situations just to see what type of language they have as it relates to vested rights, existing uses. And what would be your thoughts on how the UDO handles non-conforming uses?
So the UDO basically assumes that anything that was in existence prior to the adoption of the UDO, which was September of 2013, may exist as it is in perpetuity with no issues. The biggest area where we see this is if somebody has a sub 1 acre lot, for example. Sub 1 acre residential lots can be developed with for residential purposes with no problems, even though they're less than the minimum lot size requirement, as long as they don't violate setbacks or any other provision or anything like that. So the UDO basically says, if you were in existence at the time this ordinance came into effect, you're basically automatically grandfathered in. The high impact development ordinance, on the other hand, required a little bit of effort on behalf of non-conforming properties to submit that paperwork within a year's time.
And I don't have an issue with the proposal. I'm just a little concerned about the inventory of the businesses that will be affected by this. Because the HIDO covers a vast array of businesses. And do we have an inventory of the existing businesses?
As a matter of fact, I do. With the caveat of this is the best inventory that we can put together. I spoke with Donnie Powell in Environmental Health, has been a county employee now for going on 20 years. I spoke to some others to try to get an inventory. And we tried to give the benefit of the doubt too. Even if something had been out of operation for a while, we sent notification to those property owners in case they wanted to go ahead and submit paperwork or kind of make their case that they were or were not subject to the grandfather. The Leesburg Speedway would be a good example. But so we came up with 12 properties. There's a resource extraction property on Barnwell Road, Foss Recycling, Blossman Gas on 86 South, Keck Logging, the Leesburg Racetrack, which I mentioned earlier, the sawmill on Milesville Road, a sawmill on Pagetown Road, the Pelham Rock Quarry, the solar farm on Shady Grove Road, 2 solar farms on Highway 62 headed towards Milton. Another fuel storage facility on 86 near South Elementary School. And then the solar farm property at Piedmont Electric Membership Cooperation. And of those, already about half have submitted the necessary site plan documentation to be grandfathered in.
And there are some solar farms that haven't been constructed yet, but they've been permitted. So do we know?
There is one solar farm that has been permitted but not yet constructed. And on that specific solar farm, I've had a conversation with the county attorney. We've actually reviewed documents and the timeline and everything. The county attorney's interpretation of that situation is that because they submitted paperwork to be for approval prior to adoption of the high impact development ordinance, they would not be subject to the high impact development.
As long as they're registered with the North Carolina Utilities Commission.
I don't think that registration with the Utilities Commission has anything to do with the local ordinance. It's more just about the timing of submitting documentation for approval.
And they're part of the 12,
No, they're not part of it.
so that would be 13.
Yes, basically.
So the question on this, on the list of 12, so I think what I'm understanding is during the first year, none of these applied for a non-conformance, right?
That's correct.
And then you proactively
Mhm.
sought them out. Now, when the HIDO was passed, did we do anything proactively to contact any of these people at that point? Or we just kind of left it up to them to figure out that, hey, there was a new
Yeah,
thing and you need to be compliant and you need to get this exception compliance or non-conforming permit if you so desire, right? So
yeah. So the HIDO almost explicitly states the burden of proof and grandfathering shall be on the property owners to submit such documentation. The gentleman spoke earlier about keck logging. That issue really bubbled up in January and involved a couple of site visits by myself, photographic evidence, a letter to keck logging, and then some conversation back and forth, and eventually a conversation with the county manager about proactively reaching out to these property owners and informing them of the ordinance, and then having this September 15th extension by which they could comply.
And the ordinance was published, released in the paper
And
and on the website. Right?
And I remember at least one of the properties, representatives from the Rock Quarry and Pelham, I believe, weighed in on the ordinance prior to adoption.
As it relates to storage tanks, Matt, I'm thinking about other areas in the county. What are the qualifications that they had to abide by? Does it have to be at least one storage tank?
So
Storage tank?
as it stands right now, there are no fuel bulk storage facilities that would be regulated by the provisions of the HIDO, because the HIDO really envisions a rather large operation with multiple tanks and various residential, industrial, commercial type customers.
it's kind of like these bulk fuel storage facilities, I think, are more of, it's like you're connected to pipelines or you're,
Correct.
this is not like the things we have around here where they have a holding tank, you come fill your truck up and then you go and distribute it.
So someone like Thomas Brothers, even though they're in the town of Yancey.
Correct. Even if Thomas Brothers were not inside the town of Yanceyville, they would not be subject to the HIDO.
That
because
was
it's
not those were, the HIDO wasn't trying to regulate those
Correct.
facilities.
It was more of the large scale facility. I can't remember the name of it right now, but if you're driving 40, yep,
You know, like.
you're driving 40 through Greensboro over on the south end side of 40. That big facility out there.
And likewise with salt mills, the discussion in that was, it was not to try to regulate small operations or portable sawmills, things like that. But I think we heard a case right here where, it's a relatively small operation, but
Right.
the setbacks are coming into play. So,
It's growing. There's more of them coming. I know that for a fact.
well,
I know a lot of individuals that are coming after them.
I don't doubt it either, because, if we asked Brian about this, he would have said, we export just about everything out of the county to sawmills. And I'm not saying sawmills are bad, sawmills.
It's a number one industry in this county.
So you're right. Yeah, timber is, but we're not getting the benefits of the sawmills, but, so they can bring jobs too. But you don't want them beside of your house where you can't even watch TV because they're running either, right? So that's where the setbacks come into place, and that's okay. So anyway, whether the Keck one is, that one appears to be a problem, whereas I don't think you've probably heard problems with any of these other ones, but.
No, the Keck facility is the only one that we got complaints on. And that started out as a noise complaint, but the lady who submitted the complaint was, I think, vaguely familiar with the high impact development ordinance. And after having a conversation with her about that ordinance, She then realized that Keck was not in line with the provisions of that ordinance either.
So what are our options here? So one would be, okay, there's a proposal here, to basically give 6 months. I guess the other option we have would be to say, they had a year to do it. Our recommendation is let it be, right? Or you come up with some other proposal that said something other than 6 months. Okay, you give 30 more days to get this stuff in order. If you gave them anything after today or anything after December 31st of 2021, then you're gonna pull in 8 or 10 of the ones that submitted non-compliance permits after the deadline, right? So for example, no one requested a non-compliance permit during the period that.
During the 1 year period, that's correct.
Since then, you've had 8 or 10 of these that have submitted it because you proactively contacted them.
Right.
So if we extend anything beyond the original deadline, you're gonna pull in non-compliance automatically to everyone who's put in a non-compliance permit.
If you extend the original deadline, you're gonna pull in a non-compliance automatically.
So let's say you extended it from December to today, April 26th.
Yeah.
You have received, since December
Oh, I see.
to April, you have received non-compliance permits
Gotcha.
for
Okay.
8 or 10 of these, right?
Okay.
Therefore, they're gonna automatically, or they're probably gonna get their non-compliance permits approved.
So you're talking about a new extension that really only gives that grace to the ones who've already submitted.
I'm just trying to understand what our options are.
Okay.
I'm not proposing any.
You have, I mean, almost unlimited options. Like you mentioned, you can recommend to not extend the deadline. You could go with the September 15th. You could have another date. You could do any number of things. I think it's important to remember that the planning board in this situation simply reviews and recommends, and the ultimate authority for this type of activities with the county commissioners. So,
Man, I got a question.
yes, sir.
What's involved in them asking for this permit?
It's really just submitting a site plan of their existing operations. So with the setbacks included on the map. So the solar farms, for example, turn around and immediately got me their stuff, because as soon as they have a finished product, they do what's known as an as-built site plan. And they've got a perfect diagram of where all their lines are, where all their panels are, distance from property lines, distance from the road,
They just
everything. I mean, it was, they just got it to me immediately. Not everybody submitted documentation that was necessarily that clean and orderly, but giving them the benefit of the doubt, we haven't had a problem with anybody's site plan so far. The gas facility, on the other hand, instead of a site plan, they just submitted a letter that kind of detailed their specific type of operations. And the determination there was they wouldn't even be regulated by the ordinance, so they didn't even need to submit a site plan.
Because the state regulates.
Well, just because
Is that philosophy you talking about?
because they just don't meet the criteria of the ordinance.
What about Rockmore?
Rock Quarry submitted their site plan. The Pelham Rock
Yeah,
Quarry,
I mean, they had all their setbacks.
the Pelham Rock Quarry submitted their site plan, and we got it on record.
But they didn't even submit it until after the deadline.
So after we notified them, that's correct.
And what would be the implications if the HIDO mirrored the same non-conforming language that was in the
I think it would just be, it would require a much larger change than simply extending the non-conformance deadline. You'd have to alter that entire provision for grandfathering. But it would just be a matter of, from an administrative perspective, just trying to recognize everything that's in place today and making sure that it wasn't regulated by the ordinance. I think it's good to have an inventory of those site plans, because as I always say, if I drop dead tomorrow and there's a new county planner that comes in, they would be able to say, okay, we've got this ordinance, which is relatively new, but we've got this inventory of existing properties, which is very helpful from an administrative perspective of knowing what is and isn't grandfathered.
And also one other question, so I'm just throwing hypothetical. So let's say you recommended not doing this, let it stand as it is, right? The next option these properties would have at that point would be to go through a variance application process, right?
No, they wouldn't have to go through a variance because they're not proposing new development. So they would receive a fine for technically violating the ordinance by not submitting paperwork prior to the grandfathering deadline. But I don't see any way that the county could stop them from existing. I mean, I think
Fines on a per day basis, though.
it could be, yeah,
$500 a day.
it could be. So I think that they
That might stop.
pay a fine and then say, oh, okay, sorry, we missed the deadline. Here's our site plan. I think
But they would have to remedy and get within compliance with the setbacks.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, some, they're good, I mean, if we did nothing, right, and they're not compliant, what happens here, right? They certainly would get, there would potentially be fines, right?
Yeah.
But unless they make their property compliant with the Idaho, they're gonna have to stop operation, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm just trying to make sure I'm
Yeah.
understanding the.
I mean, I say yes, I say
What we-
yes,
What
with,
we propose here, right?
yes, with the caveat of I would probably have to have a very in-depth conversation with the county attorney. But yeah, I think you're right.
So the rock quarry in Belleville, it's been there 40, 50 years too.
It's here when I come here in 70.
So if we didn't do anything, they would just shut down. Because I don't think they can even set that.
Yeah, well, I haven't looked at it specifically to know how the Idaho would apply, but it's very, very restrictive. compared to-
Yeah, but, I mean, for example, these sawmills, right? The other language that's in the Idaho is, you know, okay, they gotta have a permanent structure, but they also, I mean, there's a lot of leeway here, right? They had to have like, was it 3 or 5 full-time?
3 full-time
employees?
employees. Yeah.
And you gotta operate consistently for 180 days.
Right.
So, you know, small operations aren't gonna hit that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a specific provision that allows for what it calls temporary sawmills.
So, you know, the one we heard about today, well, if they only had 3 permanent employees, then they're
Right.
still not.
But they've got, they in particular have a permanent structure under which the sawmill is
Well,
housed.
yeah, but is this all of the above or any of these conditions? This is an interpretation.
What is theirs, Matthew? What is their main problem?
If I
Noise
remember-
ordinance?
If I remember correctly, it's any of the conditions.
That particular, no noise ordinance?
The origination of the complaint was noise. On further review, it was found that they were in violation of the high impact development. And specifically,
From setbacks.
how it relates to
Setback from the.
operational spacing and internal setbacks, just basically distance from property lines and other occupied dwellings.
So there's no noise provision in Idaho.
No, it's not.
I think we looked at it, but it's really, really tough to nail down noise.
Well, and there's already a noise.
I think you had it in the UDO, right? You know, it's already in all of them.
Not in the UDO and the Castle County Code of Ordinances.
So I
I
think.
don't know if that restricts rural activities, but.
This is a complicated situation.
So the simple solution is to extend the deadline and get them under the grandfather.
Yeah. Move them on. Yeah, exactly.
No, get your best.
Yeah, get your stuff together.
So we'd be
Yeah,
done.
you're gonna have one very unhappy.
Treat them like a bunch of little 6-year-olds, and get them squared away, get all the gloves and coats all.
Well, I think you have gotten non-compliance from, or requests from the majority of these who, it's like this, the racetrack people. I mean, that place is long gone. They're not gonna try, right? This the metal recycling facility,
All's just closed.
they're closed. And
it's for
you're not gonna get it. You're not gonna get a request unless somebody new buys the place, right? So that one's probably gonna solve itself.
I got a big sale sign on the gate.
Right. So, yeah.
So that'll leave you 2 or 3 to work on, man.
Out of all this, Russell.
We narrowed it down for you.
Has the sawmill submitted a plan?
Chemical logging has, and the sawmill on, Milesville Road has. The Pagetown Road sawmill has not yet submitted a site plan.
They've been notified they need to.
They've all been notified.
Do both of those sawmills, are both of them operational?
As far as I understand, I mean, like I said, I cast a pretty wide net in contacting these property owners, and in the letter said, if you don't feel that you should be regulated by this ordinance, please contact me and we can kind of work through the provisions. So, you know, they had several options: submit a site plan, submit other documentation, talk to me about whether or not you think the ordinance applies. I mean, we gave a lot of property owners the benefit of the doubt, and we cast a wide net to say, let's have a conversation about whether or not this even
But
applies.
the consequence was somebody had to reply. If you
Yes.
sent them a letter, they had to get back to you one way or the other.
Yeah, that's correct.
So, let me entertain a motion. I'll kick it off, right? This is discussion, but I would say, let's make a motion to change the proposal to another 30 days. I don't think we need 6 more months to go out and, if these people haven't already done it after you reached out to them, they don't need 6 months. They got 30 more days. It's good enough.
From today's date.
From today.
The issue's got to have a public hearing.
Public hearing, as I understand, is scheduled for May 2nd.
Okay, when does their this expire?
When does what expire?
Their deadline, it's already expired. Okay. Give them another 30 days.
Just make sure you fall within the public hearing.
Do you want to amend that to say 30 days from adoption of the amendment or public hearing? Or because what's going to happen is after today's review and recommendation, it's got to go before the county commissioners. They've got to have a public hearing to officially take action on it. That public hearing is scheduled for May 2nd. So your timeline is kind of cutting into when their public hearing.
Okay, well, it's the right thing then, just because of the timing of this. I mean, I'm just trying to say, I don't think we need 6 more months, right? So if you want to reword it to say 30 days following the public hearing is the deadline. So
Why don't you just name the date?
I just don't,
June 1st.
June 1st.
June 1st. That's right.
Just change September 15th.
Mr. Hoagland, if this provision hadn't been in the height of it, and these companies would have had vested rights.
I always hesitate to answer vested rights questions because that's such a legal issue. But I would assume yes.
No matter how you feel about these businesses covered by the height of it, they are being treated differently than what's in the UDO. But anyway, we've got a motion, Mr. Oakley, to extend 30 days. Is it from today's date, Matt?
I believe the motion was amended to read June 1st, 2022.
Motion to extend non-conforming use deadline to July 1st, June 1st. No second. Second by Mr. Foster. Any discussion?
There was one other thing on it that says set within the set 1 year period, strike that. It's part of your motion.
Well, that would have to apply.
To adopt this.
Adopt that with the date change on it. Because you're gonna have to do that piece too.
Okay. All those in favor, let me know by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Motion carries.
All right, what's next for?
All right, Mr. Hoagland, now we're up to the broadband.
I warned you this would be a long one.
Did we get double time?
I will, unless Mr. Foster has a lot of questions, I would agree. I don't have a- Okay. All right, so next on the agenda, under planning department updates, first for broadband. Some really good news on the broadband front. I can pull up a map if you would like, but almost all of the land area south of Cherry Grove Road and then pushing to the north along Albus Boswell and up to like Oakview Loop Road. That entire land area, if I recall correctly from what Charter updated us on, should have been connected with high-speed fiber to the home service by the 21st, which was 5 days ago. And customers in that area will have the option to be turned on by May the 6th, which is a couple of weeks. That's beautiful. That's a nice, good chunk of the southern portion of the county. And if I remember correctly from what they told us, they're still on track to have the initial build out from the RDOF funding completed by the end of 2022. Okay. Another thing similar to that, that I'll share with you here. Let me get to the right screen. Do a quick little share. Commissioner Ostriker can expound on this much more than I can. But the county commissioners recently adopted a resolution which would provide support of up to $250,000 to the winner of the GREAT grant funding for Caswell County. So hypothetically, let's say the charter applies for GREAT grant funding, additional state dollars for internet deployment in Caswell County. If they're awarded, or if any other broadband provider is awarded, then correct me if I'm wrong again, the county has agreed to match with $250,000. Up to $250,000. I suppose that's me. All right.
That's from the federal money that county received from.
That's where the
COVID stuff.
That is the ARP, American Rescue Money.
And that covers areas that are not part of the RDOF. So it expands the total
Correct.
area. Okay. I mean, it virtually brings the whole county.
Potentially could cover the whole county.
Yeah.
Right?
Between the RDOF and the GREAT grant and the CAB and existing
And SpaceX.
and existing
Starlink.
customers appear to be future customers that meet the minimum speed requirements. It virtually covers all. There may be an isolated area that they can petition to get in.
Yeah. So that's broadband on
Let
the.
me
Yes, sir.
I did send out a broadband message to be sent out to everybody. Did everybody get that? For those that had internet, for those that have email addresses. Yep. I know you understand. Could you pull up the internet base or the site with that message? You have any problem with it? Okay, just feedback.
Yeah, it worked.
Okay, great. And I did see some guys on the side of the road yesterday. I turned around and went back and I said, "What are you guys doing?" And it was on Bethesda Church Road right off 158. And what they were doing was checking the height of the electrical poles. I thought this broadband would be put in the ground. It's not. It's only put on Duke. They work with Duke. And they said on behalf of Charter, they said they're checking the light poles, make sure they're the right height so they can run the wire on top of the light poles. So it's not good. I thought it was going to be
Some of it's going under, some of it's going under.
depending on the area.
I think it's a matter of least resistance. So if they can get it on an existing pole, whether that's PEMC or Duke or whoever owns the pole, they're gonna go that route. If they need to go underground, they'll go that route. I think they're just all of the above.
That was in my backyard.
They replace the pole.
They were in my backyard, so I was just glad to see them.
There you go. Okay, so with regards to cell towers, I guess this was 2 or 3 weeks ago now. Doug Barker did pull 2 building permits for new cell towers, the Casville Tower on West 158, and then the Prospect Hill Towers. And he did also submit to me confirmation of authorized NCDOT permits as well, which are required for cell towers, an approved NCDOT driveway permit.
He said 6 weeks. Last time he was here, he said 6 weeks. It'll be about 6 weeks before they'll be done.
Yeah, and let's hope that's the case. We can't twist his arm, but we can certainly help.
We asked him to sit that summary of everything that's going on and deadlines. Did he do that?
No, there was no real summary in our communication. I said,
I've asked him for that personally. We directed him when he was here.
I think in our conversation, now that we have confirmation that he's got building permits and driveway permits, that was basically the update for this month.
Mr. Oakland, is that both of the cell towers on Prospect Hill?
No, the one on 158 in Casville, and then the other one is for Prospect, right on the Orange County line.
8649.
Yes. Yep. And the one, from what he told me, the latest update from him was the one across from South Elementary is still in federal environmental. Okay, we touched on this a little bit earlier. I just wanted to update the board on this. This isn't anything that you need to take action on, but I thought it'd be good for you guys to know in case you get questions. So as I mentioned earlier, if an RV park proposal is going to be less than an acre of disturbed area, then it can be approved administratively. This is an RV park that was recently approved for Highway 62, just south of Culver Road. So not quite into the town of Milton, but just south of the town of Milton. They're proposed, and they're going to phase this into, the top half is phase 1. We've actually got a close up of that. Top half is phase 1, where you've got your RV and parking sites here. And then this is a shared recreational area. And then phase 2 will be the southern half of the property. In total, this was about 32,000 square feet of disturbed area, which is about 10,000 less than a 1 acre minimum. So it's been approved administratively, did not need to come before the planning board, but I just wanted to make you guys aware of it in case you start to see this thing being developed and wonder why it didn't come before the board. That's all I got.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hogan.
Yes, sir.
You're a good man. All right, any other updates?
That's all I got.
All right, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, all those in favor, let me know by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. All right.